He understood optics. A few high-profile arrests, flashy news clips of him handcuffing young men, always black, always public hand. Suddenly, he was a media darling. Tough on crime was the tagline, but the truth had more to do with manipulation than merit. He curated his image carefully, righteous savior of the streets, fierce protector of public safety. But that mask was about to crack. Across town, a man named Elijah Cole was stepping out of a modest corner cafe. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, blending in like any other brother from the block. To the average passerby, he looked like any young black man's serious face. Purposeful stride, eyes always scanning. But Elijah wasn't just any man. He was deep undercover, assigned to investigate corruption within city law enforcement. His cover was clean, airtight, constructed with months of groundwork. Not even his neighbors knew who he really was. And that was how it had to be. His mission was simple: follow the whispers of abuse, dig into the blue wall of silence, and expose the rot from the inside. But fate had its own timeline. Captain Hensley had been scanning social media the night before, itching for his next moment. He needed a clip, something raw, dramatic, shareable, something that would blow up the algorithm. And that's when he saw Elijah. Not who he was, just what he looked like. A young black man, walking alone, phone in hand. Suspicious enough, Hensley thought, to sell a story. He marked him a perfect suspect, a narrative already half-written, one that played well to his audience. And he had no idea he was targeting a federal agent. As Elijah crossed the street toward the public library, he noticed the cruiser idle just a bit too long at the light. It wasn't the first time. He had seen the captain before, too confident, too calculated, like a man who viewed power not as responsibility but as performance. Elijah made a mental note. Something about this didn't sit right. The eyes watching him weren't just looking, they were planning. And in that quiet space between steps and suspicion, a battle had already begun. Not just for Elijah's freedom, but for the soul of justice itself. Elijah wasn't new to being watched. As a black man, he understood what it meant to walk through America under constant surveillance. As an undercover agent, he'd learned how to spot the difference between curiosity and intent. That afternoon, the cruiser trailed just far enough to seem casual, but not far enough to hide its purpose. Captain Hensley was driving himself. No partner, no backup. He didn't need one. He had a camera and a script. From inside the squad, car Hensley narrated to his bodycam like he was hosting a true crime documentary. "We've got a possible suspect matching the description of a known gang associate," he said, voice low, serious, rehearsed. There was no description, no suspect, no crime. Just Elijah walking with a library book under his arm. When Hensley hit the lights, Elijah didn't flinch. He stopped calmly, turned toward the vehicle, and raised his hands because that's what black men are taught to do. Compliance with safety. Or so they were told. "Put your hands where I can see them," Hensley barked, already stepping out with one hand on his weapon, the other fumbling with his phone's live. He was filming both ways, dashcam and digital audience. This wasn't about safety, this was spectacle. Elijah's heartbeat stayed steady, but his mind raced. He couldn't break cover, not yet, not without evidence. But one wrong move, and evidence wouldn't matter. He reminded himself of the mission. Breathe, observe, survive. "I'm just headed to the library," Elijah said, voice calm, respectful. Hensley ignored the words. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, stepping closer, camera still rolling. The audience was building. Likes were ticking up. People loved this kind of theater action, tension, authority. He was feeding them what they wanted. Or so he thought. "What's in your pocket?" Hensley demanded, as if there were reason to ask. Elijah didn't move. "ID front left pocket," Elijah answered. "Turn around, hands on your head." The command was barked, but unnecessary. Elijah was already still. Hensley reached into Elijah's hoodie pocket, fished out the wallet and palmed a small plastic baggie he had slipped from his own sleeve. One hand up for the camera, he pulled it out like a magician revealing a trick. "Bingo," Hensley said. "Possession? Another one off the streets." And with that, he shoved Elijah to the pavement, knees in his back, cuffs too tight. The live flashed with hearts and comments. "Good job, officer. Cleaning up the streets. Get him, Cap." But the people cheering had no idea what they were really watching. Elijah's face pressed against the concrete, but his voice stayed steady. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said. Hensley smirked, misreading him entirely. Yeah, that's what they all say. What the captain didn't know was that the moment he planted that evidence, he was no longer the hunter. He was the one being hunted by the very system he thought he could manipulate. The badge on Elijah's hip, hidden beneath his clothes, wasn't local. It belonged to the Bureau. Back at the precinct, the arrest was processed like a trophy being mounted. Captain Hensley strutted through the halls with a swagger that had become too familiar, tossing Elijah's file on the desk like he was tossing a fish on the dock. He made a show of everything, typing the report, replaying the body cam footage for the junior officers, even letting out exaggerated laughs like he'd just caught the criminal mastermind of the decade. Nobody questioned it, nobody ever did. Elijah sat in holding.com, patient, focused. He'd been trained for high-stakes undercover work, embedded with gangs, infiltrated extremist groups. He had stood face-to-face with killers, but this, right here, cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't the fear of danger, it was the betrayal. The uniform that was supposed to protect, the law that was supposed to serve, it had turned itself into an instrument of humiliation, not just against him, but against every man who ever looked like him. He looked around the holding's self-scratched walls, flickering lights, the sour smell of metal and bleach. He knew he wouldn't be here long. He had protocols in place, check-ins, safeguards, but he also knew he couldn't blow his cover too soon. The longer Hensley felt confident, the more reckless he would become, and recklessness was what would bury him. Outside, the bodycam footage had already made its rounds on local news sites and social media. Hero Captain Nab's drug suspect, one headline blared. Another site ran a loop of the takedown, tagging it with hashtags like #JusticeServed and #CleanStreets. The comments were a mix of celebration and casual racism, cloaked in the language of law and order. But not everyone bought it. In a quiet office in D.C., behind a wall of encrypted servers and high-security clearance, supervisory special agent Carmen Hughes watched the footage with her jaw tight and eyes narrowed. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But when the clip ended, she picked up her phone and dialed a secure line. "Elijah's been compromised," she said into the receiver. "Pull up everything on the arresting officer, Captain Ronald Hensley, 14th Precinct." Within minutes, files began flowing in. Hughes saw what Elijah had already sensed. A pattern: unlawful stops, mysterious tips, arrests that looked too neat, confessions that were too convenient. Most of the suspects were young black men. None of them had access to real legal defense. Hensley's record, once painted as pristine, began to unravel. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Elijah was writing a mental ledger. Every word Hensley said, every camera he manipulated, every officer who turned a blind eye. He wasn't just building a case. He was holding space for the hundreds who never got to speak. For those who'd been silenced by false narratives, dirty evidence, or the simple sin of being born black in a system rigged against them. He whispered softly to himself, not out of fear, but faith. "They think this is the end of my story." He looked up at the security camera, blinking red in the corner. But it's only the beginning. 3 days passed. Hensley strutted like a king. The video had gone viral. National outlets picked it up. Fox News called him an example of modern heroism. Talk radio hosts praised his instincts. His precinct, drunk on secondhand glory, congratulated him like he'd single-handedly wiped out crime itself. He soaked it all in. Press requests, podcast interviews, even a local award from the mayor's office was in the works. But he hadn't noticed the silence from federal channels. No handshake, no briefing, no heads. That's because Hensley wasn't being praised behind closed doors. He was being watched. Special Agent Hughes had activated what the Bureau called Code Level Black. It meant containment, covert oversight, and preparation for exposure. Her team began digging, pulling bodycam archives, subpoenaing dashcam footage that mysteriously never made it into the precinct's shared files. What they uncovered was not one bad arrest, it was dozens. False charges, edited footage, lost evidence, stories from young black men whose voices had been buried under a mountain of misconduct, and yet, it still wasn't enough. They needed irrefutable proof. They needed to catch him in the act not just once, but with intent. And so they waited, gave him rope, let the arrogance rise. Back in holding, Elijah was released quietly on a judge's order. The paperwork cited insufficient evidence. No fanfare, no apology. Just a silent walk back into the city he had never left. He was calm, but the storm inside him was starting to move. He didn't go home. He didn't return to his safe house. He returned to the streets, to the very neighborhoods Hensley claimed to protect. And the people there, they remembered him. They'd seen him taken away on the news. Now they saw him back, free, walking tall, and something stirred inside them. "Didn't you get locked up?" one teen asked. Elijah paused. He looked the boy in the eyes. "Not locked up, just held back a little." Whispers spread, quiet nods followed. People had been watching. They'd seen too many like Elijah disappear. But this time, he came back. And not with rage, but with purpose. Meanwhile, Hughes made contact. A burner phone dropped through a quiet network. Elijah picked it up in the back of a laundromat. One word texted to it: green light. He knew what it meant. He was cleared to engage, cleared to bait, cleared to bring the whole thing crashing down. But it had to be precise. No panic, no shortcuts. The truth had to land like a hammer, not just on Hensley, but on the system that let him thrive. That night, Elijah sat alone on a park bench as the sun dipped behind the skyline. In one hand, he held the burner, in the other, a hidden mic. Across the street, the 14th Precinct glowed under harsh fluorescent lights. He whispered, "Time to knock on the devil's door. Because to bring down a house of cards, you don't need to destroy the whole structure. You just need to pull the right one." The next morning, Elijah walked into the 14th Precinct like a man on a mission. Not a free man, Not a suspect, but something else entirely. .com/steady, unreadable. Officers looked up as he passed. Some recognized him. Most didn't. That was the way he wanted it. He had requested to speak with Captain Hensley privately, claiming he had information on a local gang moving weight through an abandoned building on Reading Street. It was bait, carefully crafted. Hensley took it without hesitation. He always craved the solo win. The lone hero narrative. The image of walking into danger alone and emerging triumphant, flexing for the camera. He didn't care about truth. He cared about the story, and that would be his downfall. They met in a small interrogation room. No windows, just concrete walls and a single camera eye in the ceiling. Hensley, always suspicious, asked his men to leave. He said it was for safety. But really, he didn't want anyone else stealing the limelight or hearing what he was about to do. Elijah leaned back in the metal chair, posture relaxed but heart pounding beneath his chest. Beneath his shirt, wired and live, was the real audience. Special Agent Hughes and her team were listening in real time, recording every word, every move. You said you got info, Hensley asked, leaning forward. I got more than info, Elijah replied coolly. I got opportunity, a big stash, untouched. I'm trying to get out of the game. You feel me? Hensley's eyes narrowed. He smelled advantage. He'd heard this story before. Young black man wants to flip, save his own skin, by his freedom. But this time, he didn't realize the player at the table wasn't desperate. He was deliberate. So what's in it for you? Hensley asked, his tone cautious. Just want to walk clean? No record. My name off the books. You help me with that. I'll tell you where the drop is. Hensley laughed. Man, that ain't how this works. Elijah held his gaze. You made things disappear before. Don't act brand new. That line hit. Hensley's expression flickered just a second. But in that second, the mask slipped. You got no idea what you're messing with, kid, Hensley muttered. You think I haven't done this dance before? And there it was. Admission without confession, implication without caution. Elijah kept pushing. I saw what you planted on me. Silence. I know it wasn't mine. More silence. You want to make that right or you want to go viral again? At that, Hensley stood abruptly, face hard. You better be careful with what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting, Elijah said. I'm telling you. I know. And now, they do too. From a van parked a block away, Agent Hughes heard the final trigger phrase. The team moved in. Before Hensley could reach for his gun, the door burst open. Tactical vests flooded the room. FBI, DOJ, Internal Affairs, cameras rolling, but this time the lens wasn't controlled by Hensley, it was aimed at him. He was caught live, dirty, cornered, and Elijah. He stood up, calm, as ever. Badge number 7243, he said, FBI, Undercover. Hensley froze. The color drained from his face. You just tried to frame a federal agent. Captain Ronald Hensley stood motionless as the federal agents poured in around him. The smirk he wore for every arrest, every body cam clip, every media spot, vanished. In its place, confusion and fear warred beneath a mask of fading control. Elijah stepped back, letting the professionals do their work. He had done his part. Now the Bureau would handle the rest. Agents cuffed Hensley, reading him his rights slowly and clearly. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd made a career out of public arrests and dramatic takedowns now found himself on the other side of that same theater. The same cuffs he had used to degrade, to perform, were now binding his own wrists. Outside the precinct, the media had already arrived. The FBI had tipped off select journalists, ones who had once sung Hensley's praises. Now they were asking different questions. Corruption, framed evidence, targeting black men for views. The headlines flipped within hours. The narrative collapsed like the house of cards it truly was. Elijah sat in the back of the surveillance van, watching it unfold in silence. Agent Hughes sat beside him, studying the live feeds. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She didn't celebrate. When people hear my voice, they start to just nodded. You did what you had to, she said. Elijah shook his head. I did what too many didn't get the chance to do. That night, social media erupted again, but this time with truth. The video of Hensley's arrest hit millions of views. His own footage, edited and weaponized in the past, was now used against him. The internet was watching, but this time it wasn't entertainment, it was accountability. The men and women Hensley had falsely accused, their records were being reviewed, their cases reopened. A new task force was being assembled. Officers who had stood by in silence were facing internal investigation. It wasn't justice yet, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall. And cracks let in light. Asterisk news of Elijah's undercover status and Hensley's corruption spread quickly through the city, but no place felt it more than the neighborhoods Hensley had policed. For too long, these streets had watched their sons and brothers harassed, arrested, and disappeared. Now, they were watching something else unfolding in real time. Outside a local barbershop, an old man turned up the TV as the news report played. A small crowd gathered around, some in disbelief, others shaking their heads. I knew that boy wasn't no dealer, one barber muttered. He had books in his hand, not bags. Teenagers on bikes stopped to listen. Mothers walking home from work paused. phone cameras raised, recording the screen like it was holy. At a nearby community center, organizers quickly pulled together a town hall. It wasn't formal, but it was full. People packed into the gym, anger and relief braided together in every voice. One woman stood up. Her son had been arrested last year under suspicious circumstances. We said something wasn't right, she told the crowd. They called us angry. They called us liars. But we were telling the truth the whole damn time. And now the city had to listen. Elijah showed up at that meeting not as an agent, but as a man. No badge, no suit, just himself. He took a seat near the back, letting the people speak. He wasn't there to be a hero. He was there to witness, to learn, to grieve with them. A young man approached him during a break. You risked everything, he said. Why? Elijah looked him in the eyes. Because I was tired of watching us get buried by lies. In Washington, the ripple effects of the case reached higher than anyone expected. Congressional leaders demanded hearings. Civil rights groups used the case as a banner for systemic reform. The Department of Justice launched an inquiry into racial profiling and evidence tampering across multiple states. What happened in one precinct was not isolated, it was symptomatic. But inside the bureau, the mood was more somber than triumphant. Elijah sat across from Agent Hughes one last time. His mission was complete. He would be reassigned, possibly promoted. But something in him had shifted. They'll make him a scapegoat, Elijah said. Blame one man, call the system clean. Hughes didn't argue. That's why we don't stop here. Elijah nodded, but he knew what it meant. The job never ends. For every Hensley, there were 5 more hiding, behind clean uniforms and polished medals. Still, his exposure had given others courage. Officers of color inside the force began speaking out. Whistleblowers from across the country came forward, emboldened by Elijah's story. An invisible wall of fear was cracking. The system wasn't fixed, but it was rattled. Elijah didn't want fame. He didn't want a book deal, or a movie, or a public medal. But his name had already traveled far. Parents told their children about him. Teachers referenced his courage. Activists used his story to reignite movements. He returned to the neighborhood, not undercover this time, but open and real. He walked into schools, met with young people, listened to their fears. Some asked about guns, arrests, jail. Others just wanted to know how he stayed calm when the captain had him pinned. I knew who I was, Elijah told them. Even when he tried to rewrite my story, that stuck with them. It reminded them that dignity can't be handed out by the system. It must be claimed, even in the darkest moments. He didn't need the country to chant his name. He just needed one boy to believe, one girl to speak out, one parent to feel hope again. And that was happening. Slowly but surely. Years passed. The precinct where Hensley reigned was overhauled. New leadership, new policies, civilian oversight, but memories lingered. Streets once marked by silence now carried echoes of resistance. Elijah moved on to other cases, other assignments. But every time he saw a young black man pulled over for looking suspicious, something in him stirred. He never forgot. He never stopped watching. One evening, he sat on a rooftop, city lights blinking like distant stars. He watched the streets below, not with suspicion, but with care. This city was scarred, but still breathing. It had been betrayed, but not broken. A reporter once asked him what justice looked like. He had answered quietly, "It looks like truth told out loud, and told in time." Elijah's story was never about revenge. It was about restoration. And in a world where image often overpowers integrity, his stand reminded people what real courage looks like. Not loud, not viral, but lasting. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to stay silent. And sometimes, the strongest badge is the one that stays hidden until it's needed most.